Welcome to this video on shooting RAWs. Maybe why you should, and maybe why you should not. First off, let's look at some of the advantages of RAW, and there are plenty along the way, and there's reasons I shoot RAW too. The biggest thing is it's harder to overexpose. In this example, in a recent wedding, I photographed the scene, got all the formal sections ready to go with the lights. And then they took a break and they had to go get a drink of water or fix the dress or something. So I shot a few other pictures without that same settings. I brightened up the exposure, shot those pictures, and then moved over to take the pictures here. And I forgot for a few pictures that I had actually not changed the settings. So the original shot on the left, this is how it was photographed, right out of the camera. It was definitely too bright. It was about a stop and a half too bright. She was glowing like an angel. The dress had no detail. Even his face was definitely too bright. And I would have been in trouble if I had to shoot JPEGs. I shot the JPEG, took the RAW file, converted it to a JPEG, and then made it into the edits here in the middle section. I brightened the highlights all the way down. I darkened the exposure like 0.25 stops on the exposure setting, and I did the exact same thing for the RAW file, the original RAW file, the 14-bit captured RAW file. And you can see the difference is pretty substantial. If you look close at the detail, the beadery, all the things you spend lots of money on a wedding dress were now captured, and you see that detail there. Where if I shot as a JPEG only and not a RAW file, you would have saw that for a handful of pictures. It just wouldn't have been there. The face tones also look, the flesh tones also look a little bit better, as we can see some of the detail, and doesn't look so pasty, problematic in the skin tones as well. So shooting a RAW format saved my bacon here, as I was able to make sure that my quality product was given to the client. And part of that reason is it does have a 12 to 16-bit format for better editing. Now this makes a difference if you're shooting compressed RAW today. Compressed RAWs typically are a 12-bit file. 14-bit RAW is the uncompressed file for most of the digital SLRs. If you get into like a medium format digital camera, you might be even shooting at 16-bit RAW. Really doesn't make a huge difference if you shoot your pictures close to correct in the studio, in the scene, in the shooting process. If they're captured correctly, it's not going to make a huge difference. But you do have a little more bits. And the more bits, and it seems like 12-bit, 14-bit, 16-bit won't make that much difference. It makes a better file size, but it also does give you better range to recover without as much quality loss in your edits as well. Here's a picture I shot. This one's probably like 12 years ago. Shot it with an old Canon 40D. And so it was not the newest camera in the block by any means. And I shot this picture, a light didn't fire in the studio, and it went completely black. You couldn't see any detail in the image. So I thought, I'll take the JPEG and I'll take the RAW, and I'm going to brighten them up 5 stops. And this is what I saw. Major differences. Yes, it looks kind of a grunge look here with the JPEG piece. But in terms of quality, we can actually have a usable image on the right compared to the left. I could do effects to make it have that grunge look if I wanted. But there was much more range and detail because I shot with that 12, actually I think it was a 12-bit instead of a 14-bit RAW on that particular camera. It was a little bit older camera. But it does give you the range to boost an exposure and to make mistakes, which does happen, even to the best of us, to make sure we get the best quality for our clients. Here's a shot from also a recent wedding. The underexposure correction was about 5 stops. I brightened here. Instead of shooting for the window, I was able to brighten up. Definitely showing a lot of noise here with the JPEG. For the RAW file, it actually looked brighter by shooting at 5 stops brighter, which I thought was interesting. If you zoom in a little bit so we see a little more detail, you can see here we're getting some of the texture, the noise is in there. With the RAW, we still have texture and noise. I didn't turn any of the noise on. I didn't reduce that in the post-processing, but it does have a better quality in terms of brightness, more tones, more detail. If you play with the noise reduction, you can start to reduce that noise as well. But more range of forgiveness by underexposing forgiveness with a RAW file. Also allows lossless image adjustments in post-production. Many of the different files that we edit in our camera, we allow for white balance. We can change it as if we went into our white balance camera and changed it after the fact. There's really no quality loss because a white balance setting in the digital world is actually added on after the raw data is captured. You capture the raw data, your internal computer of the camera makes the white balance settings, and it processes it out to a JPEG. So we're actually going back in time, getting it before all the processing is done to your settings for your contrast, your color. Those white balance adjustments are done now by you after the fact, which is a pretty significant difference than actually having the camera do it for you. There are definitely some disadvantages to RAW. It does have a larger file size, sometimes about 2 to maybe sometimes 3 times larger than your JPEG mode, depending on the JPEG quality settings. And if your megapixels are the same, it's usually 2 to 3 times more. Now, in the last handful of years, Canon and other companies have now come out with a compressed RAW, which does reduce it from 14 bits to 12-bit RAW. Personally, I can't see a whole lot of difference. I've done a lot of studying to the naked eye. It's still a lot of data for editing, for auto, for exposure, under, over correction. But if you do have the compressed RAW, it might actually be pretty close to the size of the JPEG is now in the compressed RAW. So this might not be as big a deal because they've actually added a compressed RAW feature if you have that in your camera. Might be something to explore. It does require more time in editing, and this is a plus and a negative. Because it does come in the RAW file, you can actually sometimes have all your pictures in a batch. You can say all 100 pictures that were shot in the same lighting, the same situation, select all 100, brighten them, darken them, tweak them a little bit, and spit them out. So, in some sense, it can make your editing easier. It's more computer processing time, but you can actually quickly just select them all, brighten, darken, be done. Where with a JPEG, you may have to open them one at a time in Photoshop. Technically, you could open the JPEG in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw or a RAW conversion software and do it that way. But it will take more processing time, more computer power to get it right because it just takes more computer guts, computer RAM, computer memory to process a RAW file. There is a slower multi-frame rate. This has never been a huge issue with me. Probably the last 6-8 years, most of the cameras will shoot a pretty good burst of images if I put it down and shoot a sequence of images, which I don't tend to do. Some of you might be ones who like to spray and pray, shoot a lot of pictures and hope you get something. I am very selective when I pull down the trigger, so it's really not a big deal for me. But if you shoot a large sequence of images, you might have some slowness. You might not be able to process as many pictures. Could be partially your camera's option. It just only processes so many in the buffer and dumps them to the card. It also could be your card is an older, slower card. So that's something to consider as well. Major stock photo sites, something like Reuters, AP, or Associated Press, or Getty Images, are requiring you to have JPEGs captured in camera and sent to them uploaded as JPEG. So there's no chance of opening the RAW, making color adjustments, edits. And it does avoid some of the ethical issues as opposed to more editing. It also, because the speed of press photography does speed it up a little bit because they can take the JPEG right from the camera and it can be uploaded through their phones or other devices very easily and very quickly with the JPEG mode. So some companies, many of the major companies, will not even accept an image that has been shot into RAW and converted into a JPEG. So I hope you enjoyed this video with better pics in just a few clicks. Go ahead and give it a subscribe or a thumbs up if you did, and I'll see you in the next video.